Welcome to my family history with cars. Y'all liked the video that I made about how my dad might have invented Big Ultimate Energy, and that's linked in the description, so I won't go over that car. But because y'all like that and other thing I'll discuss later in the video, I figured I'd go through family history with cars, and I will start on my dad's side of the family because, well, there's a whole heck of a heap of redneckery and just kind of stupid stories and stuff of that. But actually, that's not even really the point of the video, being my dad's side of the family. So there's like slight spoiler there. So yeah, let's begin with for my grandfather on my dad's side. Uh, he was a lot older than my grandmother. He actually fought in World War II, and at least my dad never said any stories about cars that he had, so not much there. For my grandmother, she wasn't really much into cars. The only two that I know of is she had a 1990 Honda Prelude that I vaguely remember riding in. As a kid, nothing special, and then traded that in for a 2003 Hyundai Accent and traded that in around about 2009, I think it was. And that Prelude was still running perfectly fine, so maybe in hindsight, trading that perfectly fine running Prelude in for a Hyundai Accent, it was probably the worst interior I've ever seen in a car ever. And I never was actually even in the car when she was driving because not all that much longer after it was found out that she had Alzheimer's, maybe the first sign of Alzheimer's, it's that she traded in a perfectly good running Honda for a used Hyundai. Take that as you may on that, but not too terribly crazy stories with my grandma. But with the Hyundai, yeah, that got a bit of a story. Of after she got Alzheimer's and couldn't drive anymore, my dad inherited that, so that was after he went crazy and all that, and I don't know the exact story of the Altima. We were just kind of guessed for how much longer it ran, and a few more times we saw it. But we do actually know what happened with the crappy old Hyundai is that it ended up getting its tires slashed and the back window broken in somewhere in about slum as it possibly gets in Lexington, Kentucky. We had about 2015 or so, and Dad didn't have the money to fix it, so it kind of just sat there, and that was the end of it. I'm pretty sure it eventually probably just got towed off. I don't even think it was not running or anything at the time, but I'd say if it sat there long enough, it didn't. So yeah, that Hyundai didn't exactly have the Daniest in its life, and it was never the Daniest car to begin with. So, and I never understood the point of Hyundai back in that era. It was still as crap as Kia, at least from what I could tell looking at it, but I guess it was advertised as better to scam people with borderline Alzheimer's. That's about all I can think. So yeah, moving on from grandma to my uncle, still on Dad's side of the family. I don't know what cars he had when he was younger, but at no point in his life did he ever have a whole heck of a heap of money, really. But the only cars I know of having are ones I specifically remember. No particular story has been told. The first car that I remember him having was a 1990s Geo. Yeah, but the worst car that you could possibly get back when it was new, and he had it in the mid 2000s. So bad of that. Luckily, I never rode in that car, but I remember opening the door to help him get something out or something like that. And just for me opening the door as a fairly young kid, that was enough to where somehow I managed to not even touching it make the passenger side rearview mirror fall off. And of course, he didn't have money to truly fix it, so duct tape and all that. It was just there from my birthday or something like that. So then we had to dig duct tape out of the shed and have delay on my birthday and all that to fix the passenger side rearview mirror. Needless to say, that car didn't last for all that long. So actually, at the time, that was like his big purchase and stuff. And I think of it, I'm pretty sure the reason there ain't too many stories of having cars is they could never really afford one, and he was quite the drunk as well. I think I've somewhat mentioned that others as well. So for when he had a license, I'm sure plenty of times it was taken away too. For the times when he had a license, it's not like he ever had money for much of a car, so riding a bus or walking was pretty much of what he did. So lo and behold, that was actually a big purchase for him when he got that Geo that was 15-ish years old then. So after that, it broke down maybe a year or two later. He didn't exactly have the dandiest money left. So he ended up buying a early 1980s Dodge Aries. Mopar or no car, I guess you could say. And there's a famous GT Planet thread calling it Foxy Boxy and things like that. But yeah, that I'm sure it was a good car today, and probably even fairly cool in its day because it looked pretty good back then. And at least in Grand Theft Auto 5, I don't know the others, but definitely in 5, its version is kind of a mix actually between it's supposed to be the 80s Mercedes Benz mixed kind of with the Dodge Aries. It's kind of a 2-in-1 type car, so it didn't look too much like either for copyright issues and such. So that car probably was decent back in the day, but yeah, by then it was about 20 years old. Probably around that, I think even older. And yeah, I don't even think it lasted a few months. But by then, that was actually when I wasn't really all that much in contact with him much anymore. Because by the time that was when Grandma started getting Alzheimer's and he didn't want to take care of her at all. A lot of it too, he didn't really have the money to as well, but he was also drunk. So all combinations of that too. So there's not much really direct contact with him after that. But whatever. From how I heard, the last thing I heard is he had some early 2000s Ford van with some panels dented in and was white and rusted and all that. So I'm pretty sure he got on some government list. I'll just say don't get free candy from a van looking like that. He wasn't that type of person, but he could probably have gotten mistaken for that type of person. Life that he lived and all that. So yeah. As far as I know, he's still alive, but there ain't tons of information really on him, and I don't think neither of us really want to contact either of us, so that's that for him. For my dad, in general, his story started as he worked paper routes and stuff like that around about 16 years old to get a mid-70s Ford LTD in the mid-80s, and it was a station wagon. He has a picture of it. Well, now that I think he literally has that picture, probably. So he has it. I have no idea where it is. But the point being is a black station wagon and not all that fancy, but it was probably the most valuable car, at least relative to like inflation and such, that he ever had, probably, because it was fairly big V8, I think, in it and such, and lo and behold, though, he ended up wrecking that one. That V8 station wagon was definitely too much to handle because about at that time was already when he was starting to do miscellaneous stuff. He admitted to doing speed in that era, so I mean, who knows what else he's doing. But he did tell a story of that era as well, is that he and his friend tried to get his friend's Toyota Supra out of an impound lot because his friend, he kept on saying his friend and not himself, his friend was drag racing it. And he told that story when I'm fairly certain he was taking my grandma's, like, not necessarily Alzheimer's, this old person, pills and stuff, trying to get high off them. So then I said, oh, of that story, it wasn't about him getting high of grandma's pills, or that he was on acid when or he said that he was on acid when he and his friend went to try and get out of impound lot, or just that they were breaking into an impound lot to get the car. No, I said, there's no way you were friends with someone that could afford a Toyota Supra. And then, of course, he grounded me for that, but I'm sure you can kind of see it coming too. He didn't remember that he grounded me for that, or even that that story was told, so probably at least 4 more times in various stages of not sobriety, he told that story again. So, I mean, as much as he told the story, that might have actually have been sure, but knowing the friends he had at the time, or at least when I was a kid, none of them could have afforded a Toyota Supra of any era. So kind of got BS on that. I don't know. So that's this friend's story, I guess, of cars. So yeah, he wrecked the LTD, but it wasn't actually completely totaled. So what ended up happening is so the damages and stuff didn't show up and all that. For some reason, he then decided to paint it to where it looked like a cow. It was initially black, and he just had a bunch of like white splotches on it, so it ended up looking like a cow. So like kind of zip tied in bits to where parts were falling off, and all that. It was wrecked enough that it certainly didn't run too well, and that's even what he told of it. And lo and behold, it lasted to about the early 2000s. I don't really remember it, but I think there was pictures of it when I was a baby, but I think it was more taking a picture of me than the car, because even if his pictures on it when he first got it in the 80s, it still wasn't the best looking thing. But then lo and behold, it ended up breaking down, and he ended up just selling it for scrap. So so that would have been like 2000 ish. And then the story of getting the Altima. Or, well, actually, now that I think it may. Because I know he said he traded in a station wagon that barely ran for the uh, PS2. Yeah, I don't. Maybe that was the same one. Maybe had a little. Maybe had something, but it's barely a little while that didn't run in them. I don't. Either way, that's not necessarily important. The point of making of that car is, lo and behold, I went to a random NASCAR race in like 2010. Maybe it was. Yeah, 2011, I guess it was. It's a 2010 race we didn't make it to. So it's 2011. My dad was already fairly crazy at the time. But then lo and behold, probably half a mile away in the Kentucky Speedway, quote unquote, parking lot, gravel mixed with grass and various bugs and stuff in there too that you really didn't want to spend too much time at. He saw a cow station wagon, so he wanted to go look at it and see if that actually ended up. And he was like, "No, I don't want to walk even that farther, getting all the bugs and stuff. Walking on that in that." So yeah, he bitched about that the entire time too, because you didn't get close enough to tell if that was his. But given that either it was that he traded it in completely broken down, or that it was almost completely broken down and he traded that in for the PS2, which I told that story before, and then it broke down later, I don't know. Now that I think about it, that is kind of hazy on how he told it. So, and that's even him telling it. So somewhere along the lines, he probably lied about that one too. But yeah, so that was something too. And then the Ultima told that story before, and then he inherited my grandma's on that accident. Then beyond that, I don't even think he probably had a driver's license. So probably by like 2015 onward, I doubt he even had a driver's license. I have no idea what he had past that. So I guess now to get into my mom's side of the family. To start off, I knew my great grandmother on my mom's side of the family up till I was about 13 or so is when she died, and she knew that I was somewhat into cars, but not really all that much specifics. So, uh, her story is that she was born in 1920 and in rural South Carolina, where pretty much everyone was poor and it was a struggle, even when she was a little kid. And then the depression hit, so it took pretty much everything the family owned, loaded it into a Ford Model T. I think she said it was 1917, from what I remember. 1917 Ford Model T, and 19 gonna go with 29. She said when the depression, or yeah, when the depression hit. So go with 29 on that one. And went to New York City. They tried to, quote unquote, make it big. But she said after a year or so, it kind of just fell into her dad was working as a elevator operator in some rundown hotel. Uh, her mom was just doing odd jobs and stuff, and she was a little bit too young to work. They actually stayed in New York to the early 40s, and then when World War II hit, a lot of people they knew where she was actually around the age of the men and all that get drafted. That a lot of people left with their separate ways, some to the war, some in other places and all that, not being able to afford New York without the man working at the time, that sort of thing. The family ended up actually leaving back to that rural place of South Carolina. But the story there of the car is that 1917 Ford Model T at that point was still their only car. Going to New York, they didn't exactly make it big. About the most they ever got of some has been celebrity. She said that she didn't even know his name, but her dad said that he was famous back in the day, and that was like back in her dad's day. So that might have been like 1900, literally. So, and he didn't have much money left, but he had a few like heirlooms and stuff back when he was famous, and they were paper dolls that instead of payment gave to various people, and somehow just being the elevator operator, he ended up getting two of those paper dolls, and apparently he said that those would have been more money, but then later on ended up getting misplaced or something like that, so I never even saw them, but that was the story of that. That was what ended up money at some point. But the point being with the Model T is the only time that my great grandmother ever actually drove was in the early 1940s, driving that 1917 Ford Model T in New York City because they needed to get stuff here and there to get ready to leave back for South Carolina as there's packing and all that. So apparently there were a lot of luggage in there, plus 5 other people, so 6 people in there also like with luggage. So she described it going places to end up getting stuff ready to leave and all that. Like, I can't remember that exact specifics, but yeah, from what it sounded like in the early 40s, her only time driving was driving a 25-year-old Model T in New York City with 6 people packed with luggage and stuff. And she said she never wanted to drive again after that, and I don't particularly blame her on that one. So that's really her only car story, but that's definitely good. So anyway, yeah, the kind of end of her thing. They moved back to the same place in rural South Carolina, and happily ever after, pretty much of that. There's still got a bit of family there now, and it's still very much rural South Carolina, but they're successful enough where they can live happy lives. So there you go. That worked. That worked out. Probably in hindsight, they shouldn't have gone to New York, but it was an experience and a story and all that. So, whatever. To my grandmother on my mom's side, she couldn't really ever outright own car, particularly because it was kind of more of the era that she grew up in. She had a license, she didn't really drive all that. Her story pretty much just went with my granddad. His story, but I'll get to him in a minute because there's actually a story of my uncle that can kind of tie into what I'll tell my granddad. My uncle had a family. His first car, after working various odd jobs, he didn't say specifically what, just various things that he got changed to in the mid 1980s, was able to get someone's junker 1974 Ford Gran Torino off of. It ran, but there were some parts missing, and he said it didn't really run too nice and that it looked pretty bad. He never had pictures of it. But he said he could definitely smoke the tires off it, and the interior was still nice. So he put a bunch of like leather stuff you put on boots on the leather interior there, and that way you'd slide around on no seat belts. In the mid 80s, this having a good old time, and actually he ended up in Florida for a little while. I think he got the car in that same rural South Carolina. I can't actually remember the exact story there. He told more of the story of the car than they said that. But his story was in the mid 80s, the cars were so slow there. His big heavy 1974 that didn't run too well, and even by then 1974 was still some into the gas shortages and the regulations and stuff like that. So it didn't have a lot of horsepower, but it still had all the torque and the massive engine. So he said that pretty much any new car that wasn't a Corvette or a Porsche, then he could beat in drag race and stuff like that. But lo and behold, that car didn't run for much longer. He said that it wasn't any accident or anything like that. It was just it didn't run too long. I don't know if that was from him overpushing it or it's kind of exaggerating the truth or whatever there. But he probably doesn't want me to get into too many details. But for a while, he didn't even have a driver's license, and then later on, like towards now-ish, getting more hand-me-down cars and stuff like that. But the point being is that throughout his whole life, he never really had a fast car, but just having that big car with that big engine that could smoke the tires and all that was fun in and of itself. Didn't really need to go fast when you could burn the tires in slow speeds and still be able to, in like a quarter mile drag race, not really the top speeds, but to beat cars. And all that, his most fun car he ever had was his first car ever, so that's something to say there too. So now to my grandfather. I won't tell the direct story of that yet because there's kind of a correlation with stuff. But I'll just do chronological for now. Actually, now that I think about it, I'll tell a little bit about my mom because there's not too much. My mom pretty much just drove what my dad had. She drove that Altima. Some ended up getting very much used Suzuki Forenza later on, and that barely even made it to 100,000 miles, but it was still probably pretty good for a Suzuki Forenza, so not anything really to note there. That was a bad car, but we got it for cheap, whatever. We got it with the Ultima's having problems. So for a little while, we had the Ultima that just barely ran, and the Suzuki that was supposed to run good, but probably not all that much better. So technically, we did have two cars for a little while, but probably those two cars in total, maybe valued at about 3,000, maybe 4,000, counting for inflation dollars, something like that, maybe two total. There, so yeah, and it ended up getting more hand-me-downs in the family and all that, but the family still being from my grandfather, so now we're getting him. His first car as a hand-me-down from his grandfather was a 1938 Plymouth. I don't recall him saying the exact model, but he said it was black 1938 Plymouth that he got. I think he said 1959, so that wasn't quite when he turned 16, but still pretty close. And he said they had that through the 60s and had a few miscellaneous used cars in between. He said the first car he was truly proud of getting is he actually got a federal government job in the early 70s, and he was able to buy his first new car, 1972 Chevy Biscayne. And that car, for where he worked in the federal government, he actually found a little bit of loophole at the time to where with that particular model, the 1972 Chevy Biscayne, I actually just looked that up today, and because I never really bothered to, but I looked it up and he's telling the truth on that. The 1972 Chevy Biscayne was actually a fleet vehicle, and the story that he was told in it is he got a great price on that because it was sold as a fleet vehicle stripped down to the bare minimum and all that. So it was still a big car, but he got it for about as cheap as prices get. 1972 was the last year it sold in the U.S. So he was able to get the way that he worded it, or the story they told us, he had a giant V8 engine, but by then there were already the government regulations, and with him working in federal government, he didn't really want to push the issue much, but he knew some ties and all that from being in government and knew the right people and stuff, so he was able to get kind of the very last of the slightly regulated, but not really completely, of the old muscle car era. And I mean, Chevy Biscayne isn't exactly a famous muscle car or anything like that. But I looked it up. I'm fairly certain the one that he had was a 4-door with 408 cubic inch V8. I don't know, like, the name of it or whatever. Like, I don't think it was LS or anything like that. But still a giant engine of it, but he said that it was stripped to the minimum, so it wasn't any sport model, and the interior wasn't particularly nice. It was big because the family was fairly big at the time, and they traveled some, so there'd be luggage and all that. They had a dog and a cat at the same time, so yeah, I kind of needed all that room and the stuff, and so yeah, he was so proud he could get this new car, and it was a nice big car, too, because, I mean, really, that was the style at the time. It probably counted as, like, mid-size in 1972. You can look at the pictures of it, 1972. Chevy Biscayne 4-door. And, yeah, he said his proudest purchase he ever had was being able to get a new car. And he probably doesn't want me to say his age, but not all that old, working in government for too terribly long. So yeah, and he had that car, and the family liked it and all that because it's big and stuff, to the early 80s. Can't actually remember what year, but I definitely know the story of it. Though sometime in the early 80s, though, is that through no fault of their own, I think what ended up happening is the semi overdid its brakes, so they weren't working correctly going downhill, and semi ended up T-boning that Biscayne with 6 people in it, which was about the average for the family and their dog and their luggage and stuff like that too. And from all of the accounts of all the 6 people, everybody was quite injured from that. I don't know what happened with the semi. They didn't get any money out of the insurance on the car, but they didn't really get anything from driver or hurt from that. I think it's generally assumed that the semi driver was okay, but everybody in the Biscayne was fairly hurt to very much like concussing for months on end from that. Everybody recovered all right, but everybody kind of claims to they have aches and pains after that that they swear they didn't have before, and all that. But the point being is, it was my granddad that was driving at the time, and he said with that big rear-wheel drive car that he was trying his best to get out of the way with it, but the car was fishtailing a bit, and he was trying to do basic maneuvers with a car that big, and he just said that he couldn't really handle a car that big to do evasive maneuvers. So he swore on, even with their being a big family, luggage and all that, it's not worth getting a big car ever again. Early 80s, gas was more expensive, and all that. As much as he loved that car, as best purchase he ever made, especially at the time, he always said, is that he swore off getting any big cars ever again, and that was in the early 80s. But again, everybody recovered. It took some people even like a year or so to even recover from that wreck, but he got a little bit of money from insurance and stuff. So, I think what he said he ended up doing is he just got a few miscellaneous cars because they were also planning to move at the time too, so they wanted to get a car once they're right there where they were moving to, so they get the plates and stuff. So a few miscellaneous cars and stuff, and I think it's 1984 or 5 or something like that. 5, I would, if I had to guess. Where they ended up, at least he and my grandmother still live today, and some of my family as well, like mom and all that, end up still living. So he ended up getting a 1983 Chrysler New Yorker, which was a fancy car and all that. But again, he found some loopholes again with getting a fleet vehicle from the money that he got from that wreck, and there was probably some payments for people recovering all that, but he never really went into specifics. That couldn't get a new car there, but he saw Chrysler New Yorker. He knew of that car. As he said growing up, those are always big fancy cars he wanted to get. He said, lo and behold, when he got this 1983, it was this little small thing. But he said when he drove that car, that it was the most advanced thing he's ever seen in his life at the time, obviously. He said that from maybe the biggest, best purchase he ever got, he found the most advanced car they ever had at the time. And lo and behold, that car, and again, I did more research on it too. It had some type of thing where it could, like, talk to you and tell you when your oil pressure is low, or put on your seat belts and stuff like that. So yeah, 1983 Chrysler New Yorker, Mopar and Elcar there on that one. His first car is a 1938 Plymouth and a 1983 Chrysler. So I guess kind of fitting the trend there, Mopar and Elcar. And that was a decent car they had up to the mid 90s, and then he traded that in for early 90s Subaru, because he said by the time they getting a bit older and all the family grew up and stuff, he just wanted something 4-wheel drive for by the time here in Kentucky, snowing and all that, and being from South Carolina, not so used to snow, and he just wanted something 4-wheel drive to be capable in the snow and that, so he got a little used Subaru Legacy, and that was a decent car, smaller even still than the New Yorker, I think. But good in the snow, just good for him and my grandmother, and she was alright with driving that one too. She was leery of driving the New Yorker, and she said just she refused to drive the Biscayne and the other big ones. But that's up until by then my granddad was pretty close to retirement and all that. He was making about as much money as he was going to. So again, he was able to find yet another fleet deal in 2003 for a '03 new Ford Crown Victoria. And the reason he ended up going for that is because he saw at the time that's when our, right here in fairly rural Kentucky, like I've always said, cop fleet just started switching to Crown Victorias. Then in '03, even though I'm pretty sure most big cities were using Crown Victorias, but like the early '90s, that ours being solid 10 years off there on that switching in '03. Again, got a fleet vehicle deal. He was not ever involved in anything in which he actually got fleet vehicles for, whether it's the Biscayne or the Crown Victoria. There's another car coming up. Were never the organizations which used federal. And he was able to know the right people and stuff to again look for fleet vehicles. So the only other times he could ever afford a new car is when it was a fleet vehicle. Strip that all the way in with as much discounts and stuff as possible. It was meant to be a fleet, and they just happened to haggle it to where they gave it to the individual. So he got the 2003 Ford Crown Victoria with as basic of interior as possible, bench seats and all that. I'm pretty sure it was an automatic. Probably only like twice ever even sat in the front there, but I think that might have been like the one extra feature it had on it, automatic transmission. But they all had the big V8s, and he said really the reason that he ended up going with that big car is because he noticed the police started having it, and he took a test drive and he realized that didn't drive anything like the old Biscayne. He said that was about the best driving car he ever had. He went from maybe his favorite purchase ever and probably his favorite car ever was that Biscayne to maybe the most technology advanced being the New Yorker. But he said the best and easiest car that he ever drove was the 2003 Crown Victoria. So he felt confident enough, even that awful wreck that happened back around about 20 years ago, still go ahead and get this big car again, and he said he made him feel like a kid again. Having that big V8 again, and I've ridden the car with him driving quite a bit, and that car could probably fit 7 people for it. Really wanted to if all the luggage and stuff. We definitely had 6 in there fairly often. Yeah, so that Crown Victoria is a good car that he had up to. Actually, well, double story there with that too. With it is that there was one that my granny, she said she never particularly loved driving it, but she was willing to still drive that one too. She said she hated parking that one. It's any big car, yeah, that makes sense. No matter how good it drives, it's still gonna be the same size when you park it. So yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, she drove that one kind of reluctantly, so there ended up being 2 cars. Everybody, yeah, and then I think it was '08 or '09, the Crown Victoria ended up being the second car, and it lasted, I think, as second car to like 2016. Yeah, I think that's alright. 2016. And it was still running perfectly fine. I think it had like 230 something thousand miles on it, running perfectly fine, still in good condition, all that. But being a fleet car, he ended up trading it in for 2012 Nissan Altima because he was actually going by what my family did of getting Nissan Altimas, even though we never told him the story about that going crazy with it and all that. All he knew is that we had that car for a long time and it had a lot of miles on it, so he didn't know the crazy stuff. So he got a 2012. That 2012 still around, and it's an car. It runs. It's not the worst thing ever. It's still around. But also seems like that Crown Victoria is still around too. Traded it in to someone that actually worked at a local community college in 2016, and we saw that car quite frequently, maybe 2020 or so, but then the gas prices and stuff got higher and less needing to travel, of course, in 2020, so barely saw it. And we're actually, for everybody's accounts, ever really only saw it parked, and that was even rarely. Dude, say even on a rare case of maybe 2-3 times a year, you see the same, seems like the same Crown Victoria parked somewhere, at least same color and looks like same year and same uh, wheels on it and stuff, so probably same one. So still, at least decent chance that Crown Victoria is still going now. And I mean, even my 2016, it was not as bad as now or anything. The gas prices going up and all that. Of my granddad being retired for a while and not nearly as much money as he had when he was working and all that. And so couldn't really keep the two cars at once by then. And him and grandmother not driving as much by then. But ultimately, I'm sure you can kind of tell where the story is going. But there's even one more minor thing in there too. Is that another car they ended up getting used in like 2021 after trading in. I don't know. Yeah, he just bought he bought a Subaru straightforward. He didn't trade anything in for that one particular. Now that I think about it, I wasn't really paying tons of attention when he was doing the MPs. Really, by that point, I didn't particularly. No one particularly wanted him driving all that much anyway. But the point being is that he got 2019 Subaru in 2021, and it actually was not a fleet vehicle. He still got it stripped out as possible and all that. But it was back to, it was like the Subaru they got 90s, a 4-wheel drive, and it was safe. And that one actually ended up being safety and the 4-wheel drive came in really well with that. Because lo and behold, in early last year, I can't actually remember the date specifically because it didn't actually end up being anything important other than it sucked for the car, but everybody and people involved were fine. Early last year, snowing, and someone else completely messed up. By all accounts, it was not my grandfather's fault, even though I've ridden with him many times. And probably by maybe 2018, 2019, swear he shouldn't be driving anymore. 5+ years later, there he is, still driving, no problems or wrecks whatsoever. But anyway, the point being it, that Subaru, and I mean Subaru, especially more late, have the reputation for being incredibly safe and all-wheel drive helping and stuff. Well, yet again, going back to the other previous story, is that semi wasn't able to brake well in the snow, and again T-boned more towards the back this time instead of right on the side. It was kind of more towards the back quarter panel of the Subaru, and even enough to where it completely knocked off its back wheel, but where it's 4-wheel drive, it was a little bit of life it stood left. It completely totaled the car. It didn't run after that, but probably for the 3 or 4 seconds it had at least a little bit of control of it. Grandfather was able to at least kind of get it enough off the road enough to where it wasn't all that big of a deal. Completely missing the wheel, and the back completely jammed in, but that Subaru was safe enough to where no injury whatsoever from it. Yeah, neither of my grandparents know how to use cell phones at all, and probably should have taken a picture of it from insurance, but luckily things ended up working out on that, and everything went people that went and look at it close enough there, and the driver thought it was cooperated and stuff over that. So no harm, no foul, on that. But the Subaru was total, but the Subaru keeping the reliability and stuff. There's your difference in the cars. That tiny little Subaru, why that one wasn't a fleet vehicle, still was actually nice. It's four-wheel drive though, and it had the safety features for a little car, and we're being packed in that car like sardines. We definitely shouldn't have been driving it, but it's just been two people there in the front though. It was perfectly safe, and it made it thing, and a giant Biscayne that probably at the time being was my grandfather's favorite car ever. People were pretty much close to death in that. Luckily, they all ended up recovering, but some people took over a year. But that little seemed pretty crappy at the time. So they were perfectly fine, even when they were in their 80s. So lo and behold, from that, plus of the insurance money he got from that car, and he said straightforward is that this was gonna be the last car to ever get. One more time, he decided to get a new car. Sounds great because he got some insurance money from the wreck too. But really about the only new car that he was able to haggle is yet again a fleet. Its very final year, 2025. From did research on this too. At least as of now, I'm pretty sure it's still, as of when making this video, the 2025 Nissan Altima is going to be the last one in the U.S. Kind of like Chevy Biscayne. In one more fleet vehicle, it still seems to know that same person. It's probably like 98 years old at this point or something like that. It's all that luck in his favor if that. Got a fleet vehicle that's supposed to go to CarMax or like a rental car place, so all stripped down and stuff like that. But one more time, he's able to get a new car that he truly never figured he'd be able to get again after he retired. All these years, almost 20 years after he retired, of everything fell in his favor, he get one more new car. Crappy little Nissan that luckily I've not been in because I don't particularly think I want to. But seeing off the video, though, it kind of sounds like it's going to positive and all that. But the point of really, and all, me making this video, not even the stories I told and all that, the main reason I'm glad I'm not particularly in the car anymore is, well, as a little over a week ago, it was found out that my grandfather has cancer that's terminal, and he probably has even less than a year to live now. So he said that it was going to be his last car to drive. He didn't feel too confident driving it, which, I mean, family felt that probably 5+ years before, but that, luckily nothing ever happened. My grandmother's still doing all right for her age, but she doesn't particularly like driving it, especially with that car. Because universally, everybody says it's a crappy car, but he's able to get a new car, supposedly good warranty and stuff on it, that inevitably we're gonna inherit, almost certainly. So we're being inheriting another crappy Nissan to kind of continue on my dad's legacy, whether he wanted it or not, but to continue on my grandfather's legacy is the ultimate hope with that, because of all things considered, with its first car being a 1938 that he inherited from his grandfather. I mean, I have cerebral palsy. I'm not going to be able to legally drive being legally blind, but at least be able to carry on his legacy of keeping the cars in good enough condition as possible despite never having all that much money, and hopefully we can keep the car on the road for a long time to come and stuff. He's gone from driving a 1938 to 2025 throughout his life. Can't really complain about that. I'm sure he's thought about miscellaneous stuff like that over time, and he was never really super into cars, but he always prided his whole family, me included, be good with money and be frugal and all that. Never spend more than you need to do, and definitely fight for a deal whenever you can get it and stuff. Like, really, about the only time I was kind of unsure getting a car was getting that Subaru, and that arguably saved his life. If he would have been on a Nissan in the same year, not so sure how that would have ended up, or for that matter, Chevy of the same year any. Probably even Dodge the same year. Not so sure it would have gone too well, but yeah, that Subaru being safety features and modern ones and 4-wheel drive and all that, worked out. And well, I would hope, I'm like 99% sure he's not gonna drive again. I would hope. Hopefully we can still drive on with his legacy and stuff, and I doubt even my grandmother particularly want to drive much anymore. It's pretty much inevitable that my mom will air that car and go down legacy like that. So, I mean, while there's cool individual stories of both sides of my family, all in all, kind of the main point of making this story is that my grandfather went through a lot of stuff with cars he didn't even particularly really want to, but of all the stuff that happened, it ended up working out in the end, and hopefully for him, it was is for a few more miles worth of yeehaw.